Welcome to Positive Parenting Practices on behalf of Lee Summit Cares. My name is Carrie Gray, and I'm a licensed therapist and prevention manager for Rediscover Mental Health. Today, our topic is back to school success. During these unprecedented times, it's normal to be experiencing anxiety, especially related to getting our kids back to school, whether they're learning from an in-class perspective or through a virtual format, or maybe it's even a hybrid. And so in today's workshop, we're going to discuss three things. One is provide some solutions for dealing with that back to school anxiety and anxiety in general as it relates to the pandemic and the uncertainties we're facing. Another thing that we're going to talk about are some tips for planning a great school year regardless of the learning platform you're using, and certainly student and parent motivation. And so maintaining that motivation along the way is certainly critical. And so we'll have some ideas for you on how to do that. But let's start first by looking at your own feelings about sending your kids back to school or the beginning of the school year. Most people are experiencing a wide range of emotions. This can occur almost in 1 hour in the day. And it's important for you to tune into how you're feeling about the back to school plan, because your emotions are naturally going to transfer to your kids. And so essentially they will be able to pick up on your emotions and follow along with how you're feeling. And so it's important that you are aware of where you're at in terms of your decisions that are being made, so that you can manage those emotions and best help your child to engage in whatever learning platform they're engaged in. Now, here's the reality here is many of us are experiencing a great deal of stress as well as stress overload. And so the first thing that we need to do in managing our emotions is just owning our emotions. Oftentimes people will ask us, how are you doing? And our common reaction is, hey, I'm doing fine, or just taking things one day at a time, where the reality is under the surface, we're feeling maybe a lack of concentration, we're irritated, we're angry, we're sad, we're really not doing so well. And so it's important that you are aware of the physical and mental signs of stress overload, because these signs and symptoms should not be ignored. It's as if a check engine light is going on in your car. We want to pay attention to it, because if we ignore these feelings, that can result in some negative impacts on our mental health as well as our physical health. So here are some things just to watch for. Poor concentration, just inability to make decisions. You might find yourself, as I mentioned earlier, experiencing different types of mood swings. Some people tend to isolate when they're overwhelmed. You might also experience changes in sleeping and eating habits. And we do have to be mindful of self-medicating behaviors as a way of coping with these signs of overload. And so keep these in mind as we look towards solutions and ways to manage the stress in a healthy way, so that we can show our children how to do the same. So the first thing we want to do is to identify what it is that we're most concerned about. And so these are some examples to consider. Fear of contracting COVID-19 and spreading it to others. Some people are concerned about their kids being home and how to manage, juggling that work environment that you're in with them being home and monitoring their academics. Thinking about how to keep the child motivated. There's a lot of concerns that people have, and each person's concerns are going to be different based on their unique situation. And so the first thing that we need to do in responding to the stress is to name or identify what the stressor is. And I often encourage people to go ahead and write it down. And so I encourage you to write down maybe your top 2 or 3 stressors related to back to school. And then we'll be able to apply some ways of responding to those stressors. Now, one thing that I brought up here in this slide is that oftentimes our concerns as parents are different than the concerns that our children have. And so it's important as you're guiding your kids through these uncertain times to take some time to get information from them on what they're concerned about. And so these are some common things that we hear from students. They certainly, many of them don't like to be isolated from their peers. They want to be in the classroom to connect on a face-to-face basis. They might be concerned about, sports clubs, extracurricular activities. Are they going to get canceled at some time, or will they even be able to participate? We know that many of our kids, virtual learning is not the best platform for them. And so certainly there could be some concerns there. But the key is that you look at what are your concerns as an adult, but also take the time to listen to your kids to identify what their concerns are, because as I mentioned earlier, they might be and oftentimes are a little bit different from the parent concern. And so what do we do then? So first off, I mentioned that we need to be aware of how we're feeling about the whole situation. So we need to have that self-awareness. And then the last exercise talked about how we're going to identify the source of stress. So here are the things that concern me the most. Now, because our tendencies are to protect in terms of the role of our brain, when our brain thinks about these stressors that we're experiencing, when it's in that protective mode, oftentimes we go to the worst possible case scenario, which can result in very unhelpful thought patterns. An example of this is catastrophic thinking, where one negative event is thought to snowball into multiple negative events. And so as we consider what our stress is, then we need to consider how we're thinking about that situation. Is our thinking helpful, or is it creating more suffering for us? Then we're going to focus on what we can control within the situation. And so we know that there are a few things that we can control in life. No one has asked for, this pandemic. Obviously, people are making decisions for us in terms of how we're going to learn and what options are available to us. And so we don't have a great degree of control over that. But what we do have control over is how we choose to respond. And so it's important that we hit the pause buttons and consider what is going to be the best response given the situation, but also knowing there are things that I can control and things that I cannot control. When we tend to focus our energy on the things that we cannot control, that creates even more anxiety and stress for us. So do be aware of that. And finally, the last piece, which really ties into being resilient, is to pay good attention to maintaining healthy lifestyle habits. And so I know that I'm preaching to the choir when I talk about the importance of movement and exercise, of getting enough sleep each evening and eating healthy foods and less sweets. But also, it is important that we work to connect with others and find ways to help our children to connect with others. We need to engage and take time to make activities that we enjoy a priority, to be able to stop at the end of the school day or work day and to be able to move into other things that help to give us peace and recharge our batteries. An example of that might also be to engage in mindfulness practices. And so here is your template for how to respond and cope with stress once you identify what that source of stress is, things that you can do to better manage that stress. So how do we then apply these concepts with our kids? All right. And so we know that as part of living a meaningful life, that our kids are going to experience hardship and disappointment and grief. And our natural inclination is to protect them from that. But the reality is, research shows it's best for us to come alongside our children and teach them how to navigate through the inevitable difficult times that come with living life. And so in each situation, it's important for us to take the lead, to show your child how to confront fear and learn coping strategies. And so while we may want to fix the problem, it's best to be empathetic and refer back to, for example, what are your main concerns and going back to school, or having to learn through a certain platform, and to be able to listen and empathize with them. And then we can focus on those solutions in terms of what we can and can't control. It is important to remind ourselves that we need to approach each situation in a calm, matter-of-fact, warm manner. And so that goes back to being very aware of where we are emotionally, because if we come across as fearful and overwhelmed ourselves, even though we may be feeling that way, those emotions will transfer over to our children. Now, sometimes what we find happening is, under situations where there is prolonged stress, that this can trigger different types of mental health issues. And so one of these mental health issues that I'm going to refer to here is an anxiety disorder, which is a type of mental health disorder that is the most prevalent mental health disorder of children, adolescents, and adults. Now, it's normal to have a level of anxiety in response to a stressful situation. We know that helps us to perform well, to prepare, to get out of bed and do the things that we need to do. But an anxiety disorder is different in that the person experiences constant worry or fear, even when there is no real threat. We find that people who are dealing with an anxiety disorder have difficulty controlling that anxiety, those emotions, and staying focused on daily tasks, and that it also interferes with all aspects of the person's life. And so if you're finding those types of symptoms in yourself or in your children, it would be a very good idea to consult with a mental health professional, because these tendencies tend to grow and become worse rather than get better. And anxiety disorders are highly treatable. And so there's no need to continue to suffer in silence. To contact a professional, you could reach out to Rediscover Mental Health. You also would be helpful to look at your health insurance to see what services are provided through that. Your company might even offer what we refer to as an employee assistance program, but those folks can help you to get back on track. Now, I'm going to share with you a scenario in terms of how you would communicate with this in a calm, reasonable way with your kid. And so our scenario is your child expresses that their number one fear is getting COVID-19 and spreading it to others. Maybe it's a grandparent or a family member. And so as a parent, we want to respond and empathize first. And so this might sound like, yes, the virus is very contagious and needs to be taken seriously. It's natural to feel a little fearful. And so we're going to validate that feeling. Then we're going to move the child to focus on what he or she can control. And so here's what we can do, or you can even ask them what they can do, what they have learned already about things that they can do to reduce the spread. And so examples from the Center of Disease Control would include, to practice social distancing or physical distancing, to wear a mask, practice good hygiene, know the symptoms, stay home when you're sick. So there are things that we can do to lower our anxieties and to establish a better sense of control in response to the COVID situation. Now we're going to switch gears a little bit here and focus on preparing for a good school year, regardless of what that platform is. So because we don't know if we're going to be in person or at home or hybrid, we're going to go with hybrid because it provides examples of in school as well as time during virtual school. And so here's a planning tool for you to consider, and I will dive deeper into each of these in the following slides. So when we're thinking about how to plan, how to get organized as we go through this new territory, the number one thing that we want to do is to set realistic expectations. We want to ensure that we cover the basics, and we want to consider our child's unique needs, meaning you are the best advocate for your child. You know your child's learning habits, what motivates him or her, what overwhelms him or her. And so it's important to consider your child or your children's needs, which might be very different. And that is just common knowledge there. The other piece is to make it an intentional connection to connect with those teachers early on. And finally, the last piece here is to create a daily routine. So let's look at these a little bit closer. When we set realistic expectations in response to the pandemic, the rule of thumb is to expect the unexpected. And so even though this is really an uncomfortable place for everyone to be, we need to be nimble and ready to adapt to different situations. We also need to have empathy. And what that means is to keep in mind that this is new territory for everyone. It's new territory for you, your children, the teachers, the administrators, the guidance counselors they're working with. Let's assume that everybody is trying their very best to do their best job to make things work in this less than ideal situation, and extend some grace and compassion to each other along the way. Now, realistically, as kids get back to school, it's important to invest time for the first few weeks in getting comfortable with the learning platforms. Expect that there's going to be problems as all the schools across the United States start getting on platforms like Schoology. And so we want to work out all of those kinks, give the schools time to work out any kinks that come up, and just get very comfortable with how to log in and to utilize the different platforms that are presented to us for different classes. We also, as I mentioned earlier, want to take some time to connect with the teachers so that you can know what is the best way to contact them down the road if there should be a problem, or if your child has some specific needs. It's important to make those known to the teachers up front and ahead of time so that you can start working with them to align some different resources for them. Also, when we think of creating a schedule or a routine for the day, we're going to need to be a little bit flexible. And so it's important to have predictability throughout the day, but we also know that there needs to be time within that schedule for movement and to make changes, if you will, as needed. And finally, we want to look at what are the academic expectations this year. And so, super honor roll might not be the focus right now, But where we might want to start is to turn in all the assignments, give your best effort, maintain a schedule, just some of those basic things in order to get the year off to a good start and to not overwhelm everyone who's involved. So the next focus here is on making sure that we cover the basics. And so with that, what I'm referring to is where will your child do their schoolwork? And so might that change throughout the day? Oftentimes a change of scenery can help. I know that there's some different cohorts that are being formed within our own community. I believe it's within the Facebook social network. It's Big Kids Helping Little Kids. And this is a way for families to connect with other families, especially in situations where parents are having to go to work, the kids are going to be at home, and finding ways to provide coverage, supervision, and help on days by taking turns handling those responsibilities. And so as you're thinking about location for study, maybe even considering their friendship bubble, who might they be able to study with, which oftentimes helps with motivation, but then what resources does your child need? And so think about the resources that your child uses within the classroom and see what we can do to establish those resources in your home classroom. And so that might be a matter of reaching out to the school counselor or educational therapist to see what options are available to assist them. Now, the next slide focuses on that, create a flexible routine. And you're going to notice that as we create the schedule, that it would be ideal. We definitely want to do this with your child. Much of this probably will be dictated by the school in terms of virtual learning. There will be expectations in terms of when they log on and how much time they're on, per day, etc. And so just that you take some time getting a better understanding of what the expectations are from the school in terms of scheduling, as well as communicating with your child about those needs that they might have within that schedule. And so finally, considering the child's unique needs and age is going to be a factor, which is something that I know that the school district staff will be looking at as they put together their plans. But if you're finding, again, once you get into it, that this isn't working for you, it's important to reach out and communicate that sooner than later with the school's teacher so that they're aware of adjustments that might need to be made in order to help your child to be more successful. So when we're thinking about unique needs also, we know that each child will need a different level of structure, supervision, and support. Obviously, younger kids are going to need more. But we also find that kids who are struggling within the face-to-face environment are going to need more structural support and supervision. And so we need to look into what resources might there be to help provide that for your child. And you should probably get a pretty good sense of what is going to be needed as you complete your second week or so of classes, because we're just getting used to the process. If it's possible, we recommend scheduling or having your child work on more challenging subjects during peak times, which essentially what that means is we tend to have more energy and focus at certain times of the day. And so focusing our energy on the tough subjects during those times would be ideal if we could make that happen. We also know that it's important to give our kids permission to take breaks and to get outside, to move a little bit, have a healthy snack that will help to maintain motivation. We also know that it's important to remove any distractions, such as cell phones, to help our kids be successful during their study time. And finally, that being willing to adapt, to be nimble in terms of how your child learns. And so, for example, a child might be given a worksheet on writing out spelling words, but they're really not wanting to do that on a worksheet, but they're willing to do that on the driveway with sidewalk chalk because it's more fun. It's okay to adapt as long as your child is getting the information, the experience, the practice that they need. You can be creative in how your child learns that information. So our next slide talks about that schedule. And so it's important that you find a way to post that schedule somewhere. Again, this goes back to creating a better sense of control over the day and reducing anxiety. Also, it's important that we designate time for school and personal time. And so we refer to this in the business world as a work-home balance. And so once the school, once the school time period is over, it's a good idea just to let go of that for now and just focus on what other activity we're doing, spending time at home, taking a break, being connected with friends, participating in an activity. That is, unless your child brings up things that they would like to talk about. Next, with regards to school supplies and making sure you've got the basics covered, here are a few local resources in Lee Summit that you can reach out to that I know are providing school supplies as well as different options for food as well. You can also reach out to your child's school for information on where those resources are, because there may be additional resources even through your child's school that you can tap into. Certainly the internet is an example of that, as I know the Lee Summit schools are providing hotspots for students and families who do not have internet access. Next, as we wrap up this discussion, we're going to focus on things that you can do in order to stay motivated and to help your child stay motivated. And so first is part of a review, and that is to prioritize, to write down what are the main goals, for this week, for next week, for down the road, so that you have a sense of realistic focus so that you're not being overwhelmed by too many things. The next thing would be to focus on your strengths in the process and then learn from any mistakes that are made. And so we all have strengths and weaknesses. We want to focus on what we do well. And as we're involved in the learning process, anytime a mistake is made, here we go. What can we learn from this? What changes do we need to make to adapt? And so a lot of that is just our attitude. Having the right attitude will help us to stay motivated. Another thing that is often helpful is to track and celebrate progress towards goals. So as we, move into the school year and students are becoming more aware of assignments and projects and tests, things that need to be done, that you could create a timeline with your child to help them break down and prepare for that test or to complete that project. And so they can track what they're doing to stay on track with that goal, but also once they're finished, finding a way to celebrate that. And so that's a huge part. And what that celebration or that incentive might look like is different for each student. And so think about that with your child. Identify what would be some good incentives for you. Your child, what motivates that child. So we want to plug in times to celebrate. Another thing that can help with motivation is to establish some accountability partners or supports for your child. And so with older kids, oftentimes this could be a peer or a few peers, whether they are studying together during a specific time or just checking in with each other to see how things are going. Having that accountability partner is found to be very helpful. With younger kids that perhaps need more supervision and structure, we can engage with the teaching staff to talk about what are the accountability measures, what are those supports going to be to ensure that our child stays on track. Now, I recognize that I'm giving you a lot of information and ideas here, and so I wanted to wrap up by sharing some different resources with you. And so if you'd like more information on COVID-19 and just helping your family to stay safe, certainly the Center for Disease Control is your go-to place. The Jackson County Health Department has information on rates of infection and spread within the community, so you can know what's happening. I know there's been some issues with how information is being tracked. I'm assured that they are working to address those things, but that can give you insight not only on outbreak, but also testing sites and other things that can help you with navigate. Another one is Common Sense Media, which is an excellent resource for you as parents in knowing, because your kids are spending more time, online, to get yourself familiar with some of the apps like TikTok that the kids are using. What are the games, movies, what parental controls are out there. The Common Sense Media site is very easy to navigate, and it is just flushed full of information. The final two are the Child Mind Institute, which focuses primarily on our behavioral or our mental health and wellness, and they have wonderful discussions with experts that you can access for free. And then finally, Operation Parent, who provides ongoing webinars for parents on a wide range of topics. And so I hope that these resources can be of assistance to you in addition to our workshop today. Now, this workshop on back to school success is part of a series of workshops on health and wellness related to COVID-19. And so I hope that you will continue to tune in and check with leesummitcares.org to learn of upcoming opportunities for parents so that you can take advantage of those. Thank you for being a part of the discussion today, and you are welcome to reach out to me at kjgray@rediscovermh.org if you have questions or if you would like a specific topic to be addressed in a future episode. Thank you for joining the discussion today.